Hi, and welcome to this chapter on migrating your content into your new system. Content migration into a new DAM, MAM, or CMS can be one of the most challenging and time-consuming tracks of the entire program. Today, I'll cover the key steps to follow to successfully execute this track of work and ensure risks are mitigated wherever possible. The key steps we'll cover include assessing your existing content repositories, planning the correct approach for your migration, content migration, and finally validation. Step 1 is to assess your existing content repositories. As part of the content migration planning, it's vital that you have a good understanding of the content that you are migrating. Make sure you capture the following key items during this assessment period. Where is your content today? Is it in existing systems? For example, legacy DAM? Is it on a network storage or hard drives? Is it controlled by outside entities, for example, third-party advertising agencies? Or is it in physical form that will need to be digitized? As part of this assessment, you need to determine if the content is stored in a structured manner with accompanying metadata, or if it has no inheritable metadata. You also need to determine the types of files that you will be migrating, as different file formats have different approaches that you'll take for migrating. For example, JPEGs are much simpler to migrate than zip files with thumbnail attachments or large video files in varying formats and bit rates. The volume and size of each file in the repository also needs to be determined, both in aggregate and at an individual level. This will help in the next phase as you plan out the correct approach for migrating each of your repositories. Step 2 is planning the correct approach for each migration. Once you've assessed your existing repositories, it's important to conduct detailed planning for how you will prioritize and migrate each repository. Let's take two typical examples and you'll find the approaches differ for each. In example 1, if we have content in a legacy DAM, MAM, or CMS, you'll have to create scripts to extract your metadata from the database or system via API and transform it into the target solution format. This will need to be done ensuring that you have a connection to the actual media files to ensure a smooth process. It's not recommended to do metadata migration from your old system to your new system directly from one database to another. The reason for this, there's a lot of internal data that is triggered during the content ingest process that will render this approach far more complex than a typical extraction, transform, and load or ETL process. In example 2, if content stored on storage or hard drives with no metadata, you will have to see if there's a way that you can deduce key metadata either from within the file, so for example, the IPTC headers, or from the file name or folder name. This can be a little tricky and prone to error as content may not be stored in the same way consistently and thus will yield a higher triage effort during migration. Once you've determined the technical process required for migrating the content, it's important that you prioritize which content needs to be migrated first. Typically, content that is newest or most in use is migrated first as it has a higher ROI than legacy archive content, as the business may actually be open to going live with a partial migration being completed. It's important that you test your migration scripts for each repository and file type in order to deduce the speed at which content can be migrated. This will determine how long the migration process will take. I once had a client who had over 300,000 PDF files. It took a minute to ingest each file. This resulted in a timeline being calculated at approximately 208 days. We adjusted the architecture to add in 10 temporary servers to bring the timeline down to 20 days of ingest. Step 3 is content migration. Depending if the source repositories are continuing to be added to during migration, will determine if you need to conduct a singular pass migration process or a multi-pass migration process. A singular pass process should be used when you are migrating an unchanging repository of content. For example, an archive that's frozen in time. This is the simplest migration approach, as you only need to conduct the activities once. However, in reality, a lot of initiatives are like changing the tires on a car that's going 100 miles per hour. This requires that content be migrated off source systems while they are continuing to be accessed in production. It's important that during this phase you create a mechanism to keep track of all content changes on the source systems so that you can conduct a delta sync pass once the vast majority of content has been migrated. This allows all additions, deletions, or updates to be reflected on the new system prior to cutover and go live. You may have to conduct multiple delta syncs to ensure minimum downtime to migrate the final changes during the cutover period. Step 4 is validation. It's important that you conduct as much validation of content both during and post-migration as you can. You can use a spot check method to ensure content in the new system is accurately reflected. You can also conduct data scripting and querying to ensure data integrity. During the migration process, you should also make sure that you have an error or triage process, as it's almost guaranteed that not all your content will make it into the system without a little more tweaking. It's also important to check that the imported content has the correct security rights, thumbnails, and previews generated during the migration process. Although data migration can be a daunting phase of the program, it is achievable by following a well thought out approach that covers all your bases with the correct amount of testing and triage along the way. I hope this information has shed a little light on the critical considerations for content migration. If done properly, the results can truly improve your content management processes and ensure you save time and money. Thanks for watching, and stay tuned for the next chapter in the series. Goodbye for now.